So I'm going to try to quickly go over how to fix your leaking coolant on your Range Rover or Jaguar. I think anything that has the same engine. Um, they have a crossover pipe on the front of the cooling system that fails pretty regular and wasn't too hard to replace. Um, you know, 5 out of 10 on the difficulty scale. And in a second here, I'll show you these pipes that I had to buy. They were like 35 bucks maybe. There you go, $33 off Amazon for those two pipes. The one that's shaped like a Y is really what broke, but you're going to replace both at the same time. And I'm going to voice over what I did here, otherwise you will hate me later. So that you're going to take off all the covers and plastic bits and pieces. Excuse me. That's me telling you not to lose your fasteners. But take off those two side pieces, the centerpiece.
The centerpiece, just yank it straight up off those two rubber posts. I did it incorrectly. I slid it forward, but I had to take those rubber posts off and reinstall them on the plastic cover there. So don't do what I did. Just lift straight up on those two posts. The rubber will come up with it, and you'll be set.
You're going to take out that center air intake. All you got to do is take the clamps off the left and the right side of the air box. Take the one on the right completely off because you're going to need to reach underneath here. You'll see in a minute where I point to this, right where I'm pointing right there. There's a connector, air hose connector right there. And you'll need to take that off before you can remove the center air. And there's a clamp right there also that goes on the throttle body. Unscrew that clamp, the flathead, and then you should be able to pull out the air intake. And there's a close-up of the port that plugs in. You're going to have to pinch. It's not real easy to pinch it, but pinch that and then just slide it forward. So this here I'm pointing at is the crossover pipe. That's one of the pieces that we're buying and replacing. That there is the serpentine belt, and you're gonna have to remove off of that pulley. Not too hard to do, but you don't need to take the whole belt off. But you will have to clear it off that pulley so that you can raise up the supercharger. Okay, at this point we're gonna start taking clamps off and take that pipe out of the way. So you remove this clamp. And clearly I had to put the camera down to get that one off. This little hose here was a pain in the ass to get off. Those little gray tabs are impossible to push with your fingers. Yeah, I ended up using literally those two little screwdrivers, pushing it in and getting it to free up. There's got to be a better way, but I didn't have the right tool. And well, good luck figuring that one out. Okay, next we're going to take off the coolant lines that go across the top of the supercharger there. And you'll use a little tool to push in on the either side, left and right side of the hose there, and just pop it straight out. That one labeled front there on the right hand side, it's a little trickier because you can't get your finger underneath there. I'll show you how to take care of that in a second. And again, push in those blue tabs, take out that line. That was one of the easier ones.
Okay, another piece of advice: when you get to taking this front hose off, you can't reach under the bottom side to get the clamp. So you have to disconnect all the other stuff, including this hose here, which goes into right here, and then this hose down here goes into the bottom of this pipe, right where my pinky's pointing. And you can disconnect that, and then you'll be able to, if I can show you, you'll be able to rotate this whole assembly kind of up so that you'll be able to access the bottom side of this guy right here. And because right now you can only get this top clip.
Okay, to remove this one, I'm just going to give you a little tip because I couldn't figure it out for a little bit. And there's a button that you can't really see. I'm going to point to it here with the pliers, and you can push it in with the pliers, in fact. But right there's a little button. Push that in while you push down on the tube, and then you should be able to lift it straight off. You can kind of see it there. It's a little rectangular button. That one you just pinch and lift it straight off. Okay, there's some electrical connectors right here to unplug. Right here is one where there's a tab on the underside, so you'll need a little screwdriver, little one like that, to help get that off. There's another one right there. There's a fourth one that I'll point out in a minute that I forgot during the video. Unplug those connectors. We'll also have to remove this fuel rail that goes from the left to the right, and I'm pointing at it right there. There's a little foam piece there on the right. Take your oil cap off so you can move that foam out of your way. And down in there, underneath that black pipe, is a little 17 millimeter nut that holds that fuel rail on. There's also a nut on the left-hand side, 17 millimeter. And then there's 4 Torx screws along the rail that you'll need to remove. So loosen those off and then just set that aside. Here's a good shot of the nut on the left-hand side. A little easier to get to. And again, a little piece of foam you got to move out of your way. Now you can just take the fuel rail out, set it aside. So next we're going to take this crossover pipe off. It's held on by, I think, 2 screws, one back there and one in the front that I showed. There's also a tab on that rear side where that screw comes out. There's a little tiny tab. You can see I'm trying to pry it up with my flathead, and I'll show it to you when I get the pipe out. Right there. It's just a little clip, holds it in, I guess. The replacement pipe doesn't have that, so he just uses a screw. And I'm pausing the video right here to point out that plug that you need to remove from this piece, and you'll reinstall it on your new piece. Otherwise, you're going to have coolant shooting all over the place. Okay, next you're going to take off this throttle body, and that's the connector that I failed to mention before, that 4th connector. It's got a little red tab on it. Just go ahead and disconnect that. At this point, we're going to take the throttle body off, and there's 4 screws you'll take out there. There's a hose connected to the lower left back side. You don't need to worry about taking that off. Just set the throttle off to the side, and then we'll move on to taking the cover off of the supercharger. Okay, some of those Torx bits were a little harder to get off, so I went ahead and got some PR blaster and hit every screw head. Makes it a lot easier. These front screws, you can get to it with a screw gun. The ones on the back side, you're going to have to use a socket, or unless you have a tool with a 90-degree bit on it. But you'll see back in here, it gets a little tight. You got to kind of get up on top of the engine a little bit. This is the mounting bracket that your engine cover snaps into, and you're going to have to get it out of your way so that you can take 2 of the
Torx screws out of the engine, the supercharger cover. So I'm pointing at those little hex screws right there. I think it's 10 millimeter maybe. And there's just 2 of them that you'll need to remove. All right, so to recap, we've got 16 of the smaller Torx screws. I got 2 of the long bolts that go, well, one goes right there, and the other one goes right there. And then we've got 4 hex bolts that go on the top there, about 3 inches long or so. To get this lid off, it's kind of stuck on, so I put that screw in right there to give me a kind of a leverage point to put my pry bar against it and to just kind of break that seal. Came up pretty easily, but once you get that up, you can lift this out of place, and it will leak on you, so be ready for coolant to come out, and be careful of the gasket there, because I didn't replace my gaskets. I just reused them. Probably not wise, but oh well, didn't have any problems. And set that aside. Here's a look at the underside of that cover we just took off. Kind of dirty. You can clean it up a little bit. And then here's the inside of the supercharger. There's 6 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that you'll have to take out to get that off. And of course, we got to still take the belt off, the serpentine belt off. You can see I've got the belt off now, and I'm trying to find a pry point, and that's about the best spot. You got metal on metal. Try not to, tear it up, and it wasn't that bad, but get a pry bar under there and break that seal, and then you're going to have to give it a little force in order to break it past this point that it's at right now, where it just kind of wiggles. Nice, gentle, easy force will get that supercharger to raise up off of the 2 posts that are on the underside of it, and sit down into 2 holes in there. And once you get it lifted an inch or 2, you should be able to lift it all the way up. And you'll see that I put a block of wood in this to just prop it up instead of taking the charger all the way out. You can remove the entire supercharger. There are some connectors on the back side that you'd have to undo. But it's not necessary if you're just doing these front crossover pipes. And that's all I was doing. So there's the block of wood that I've got sitting on top of the oil cooler, just propping the supercharger out of the way. And that gives you plenty of access to get in there and get that pipe out, that Y pipe. So here's the pipe that we're going to remove, and there's a Torx screw on the right hand side and another one on the left hand side that's behind it. And there's another screw right next to that one on the left that is part of the oil cooler. So be careful not to take the wrong screw out, because I just did it by feel. I couldn't really see it. Ended up taking the wrong screw out the first time around because they're right next to each other. So just take the one that's kind of on the left side, not the one next to it on the right. But you can get a ratchet in there pretty easy and can get those out. And then it should just lift right on out of there. Because I took the wrong screw out, I ended up just breaking the little plastic housing off where the screw was in. But it was no big deal. So here's the screw on the right hand side, and in a second I'll show you the Y pipe that I removed and where it's cracked and broken around the end sections there. Those are kind of cracked. I don't know if you can see that very well, but there's bits and pieces of plastic that are down in those holes, and there's the O-rings as well. That's where it was leaking. You can see there's the 2 screws next to each other that I'm pointing at, one on the left with a little black on it because I cracked it off. Yeah, take that one out, and it'll be a lot easier for you to get out than me yanking it out and breaking it. But here you'll see some of the broken parts. So now we're ready to put the Y pipe on, and it just sets down in there, and screw it in with the 2 Torx screws. We'll be ready to set the supercharger back down. Okay, the Y pipe is installed and we're ready to put the supercharger down. We got those gaskets there on the right and left that we want to make sure we get in the right spot.
Okay, so now I've lowered the supercharger back on, and to line up the gasket, I went ahead and I put the these rear bolts in on both sides, and made sure that it lined up with the gasket hole while I still had it propped up. And you could look underneath it and actually see that it was in there. So that helped line up the back side of the gasket. And then as you lower the supercharger down, you can actually see through the center hole here, and on this side too. You can see the bolt, you can see the gasket, you can make sure the hole lines up, and once you get those two lined up, you're pretty well set. And then just make sure that this pipe right here gets out of the way. It's you don't want to break it when you're setting this thing back down. That was the only thing I was worried about because it was kind of catching. Now I got it settled down. I got my 6 bolts all in. I'm going to tighten them up here, and then we'll go ahead and put the cover back on.
Okay, so now put all your bolts back in and do kind of a crisscross pattern as you tighten them up so that you get a nice good seal. And be sure and put that bracket back on, tighten it up so that it holds your engine cover on, and then you're pretty well ready to put your throttle body back on, put your serpentine back on. That pipe right there, that crossover pipe, goes back in. Very simple to reassemble in reverse order. And now we got our coolant that we need to top off, and you got some bleeder valves. There's one there, there's one on top of the tank, there's another one right there. And then remember I said about that plug on the crossover pipe. I didn't put mine in. I didn't realize it, so I ended up causing quite a mess when I started the car, and coolant started shooting all over the damn place. But it was pretty easy to find because it was right there on top, and it was easy to fix. Something to note when you're reinstalling the center air supply, you got to get that big circle intake to fit over top of the throttle body. You know where I've got that. My fingers are pointing at that band clamp, and you're just going to have to futz with it and make sure that it gets fully seated on that throttle. And then also remember we've got the air pipe that was connected on the underside. I think I pointed that here in a second. And you get those to line up right there. And when you push it in, you'll hear it click. And you'll know that it's seated. But it's a little bit of a just lining up type game and shoving it toward the engine and getting it to seat in there. So now that everything is put back together again, and you got to add coolant, just remember there's a little bleeder valve here. There's a bleeder valve right down underneath there. There's a bleeder valve up here and another one over here. And technically this plug right here, it's not really a bleeder valve, but if you take that plug out, certainly does the same thing. And I got a little loaner tool from AutoZone, you know, one of those pressurizer systems. It's just a hand pump. And I started to pump up the system, pressurize it. And I didn't have this plug in at that time, so this is where all the excess air was coming out, I guess, and then eventually the coolant started pumping out of there, so that was a pretty obvious and easy fix. Plugged that up and didn't really have any more issues. I turned on the heater, turned off the air conditioner so the thermostat doesn't kick on right away, and heat the car up and get the coolant running and keep adding a little bit to this, make sure there's coolant in there, and drive the car a little bit, get it up to operating temperature, and let it maybe rest a little bit, then do that again. I don't know if resting makes any difference or not. That's what I read. I did end up getting a low coolant light to come back on after the first 5 or 10 mile drive that I did. Came back, let the car cool down, topped this back off to the appropriate level, and I haven't had any issues since. So I'll keep an eye on my temp gauge and make sure the thing doesn't overheat. But the reservoir tank is holding where it needs to be, and I think we're successful. So good luck to you.